When we think about fat loss, we think about how much food we're taking in, or how many calories, or how many grams of fat, or how many grams of carbs. Maybe we think about micronutrients and vitamins, but we hardly ever think about minerals. These are 5 minerals that if you are deficient in, you can absolutely hinder your fat loss. First one is magnesium, and it's the most important, not because it's so mechanistically important, but because as a whole, we really are pretty deficient in magnesium. There was a study that was published in Diabetic Medicine that looked at a bunch of studies. It looked at 6 studies with over 24,000 people. What they found is that there is an absolute link between lower magnesium and increased risk of metabolic syndrome. As a matter of fact, for every 100 milligram increase in magnesium intake, there was a 17% reduction in the risk of metabolic syndrome. So I know metabolic syndrome isn't the same thing as fat, but they usually do go hand in hand. So the more magnesium you take in, the less the risk of metabolic syndrome. Now, to understand the mechanisms and why this works, we have to look at a study published in Nutrients. This is fascinating. And this study pointed to vitamin D. You see, vitamin D reduces the formation of fat cells. So it actually stops fat cells from growing. It sort of puts a governor on how big a fat cell can get and how much fat can form. Now, what does magnesium have to do with this? You could stand out in the sunlight all day soaking up vitamin D, but if you didn't have magnesium, you wouldn't be able to synthesize it and you wouldn't be able to activate it. Non-activated vitamin D, vitamin D2 that's not in the D3 form, is utterly, it's not worthless, but it's not gonna help us out with fat loss. There's also some newer research that suggests that a magnesium deficiency alters the gut biome to create a low-grade systemic inflammation all the time that can lead to insulin resistance and definitely impede fat loss. So when it comes to magnesium, the whole food sources that you want to go for, you can go for things like legumes, you can go for things like leafy greens, spinach is a good one. I always recommend cooking spinach so that you don't get the oxalates that would actually negate the absorption of magnesium to begin with. Then of course we have things like avocados. Seeds are really good. Nuts you got to be careful with because there's so much phytates in them that it chelates the minerals anyway, but avocado is one of the best sources. Plus you're getting the monounsaturated fats, which are heavily linked with fat loss as well. If you go the supplement route, I recommend a dimagnesium malate or a glycinate if you're taking it before bed to also help you sleep. Then we have potassium as number 2. Potassium is interesting. There was a study published in Nutrients that took a look at how potassium correlated with metabolic syndrome and fat loss as well. So with this study, they put subjects on a high-protein Mediterranean diet for a year. I love Mediterranean diets, but the biggest beef I typically have with them is they're often low protein. So I love this style because it's a high-protein Mediterranean. All groups, they lost weight. Like people that went on this diet lost weight, no doubt. But what they found when they looked at all the data was that the groups that had the highest potassium intake had the best weight loss out of everyone. So when they reverse engineered everything, they're like, wow, people that had a lot of potassium lost the most weight. Correlation doesn't always equal causation. Like the fact that they ate more potassium could have meant that they ate more healthy foods. They could have eaten more vegetables, right? So we can't take that to the bank. So with that, we look at mechanistic stuff. Well, they also found in this study that they had less inflammation, they had better insulin sensitivity, and better overall just biomarkers in general. If you reduce inflammation, then you can improve the insulin sensitivity in and of itself. This means better glycemic control, less glucose spilling over and potentially storing as fat, you're utilizing it better. But they also found that having adequate dietary potassium can influence potassium sort of sensors in the gut. And what that means, it's a very complicated discussion, but essentially it could influence the absorption of nutrients and potassium that therefore influences energy balance and fat deposition. What do I mean by that? Potassium in the gut and having adequate potassium actually influences how we store fuel. So it's huge to make sure we get enough potassium. So yes, you can take a potassium supplement. I think that's a simple way to go, especially if you're sweating. But the best thing is just getting it from foods. So in this case, squash, lentils again, so another Mediterranean style food. Yes, bananas have potassium, but there's a lot of sugar in them, and I think there's better routes. You can also go with straight up chicken. You can go with avocados. Any kind of like green veggie, again, is going to have a decent amount of potassium. Now with this, I'll make a note that there are these cool little like freeze-dried avocado snacks that I've had before that are super, super good. They're on Thrive Market, and I put a link down below for Thrive Market. They're an online grocery store. So you can get 30% off your entire grocery order through Thrive Market. This is not a sponsorship from those avocado snacks. I just know that they carry them, and they're super convenient to literally be able to carry like avocado with me on the go in a freeze-dried fashion. Just If you're looking for foods that have potassium, Thrive's gonna have them either way. But if you grocery shop, it makes sense. So that link down below is gonna save you 30% off your entire grocery order, plus you get a free gift up to $50 whenever you use that link down below. So makes it so you don't have to go to the grocery store anymore. You just go online, you sort by diet type, low carb, sugar-free, paleo, whatever, vegan, and then it gets delivered to your doorstep. Super convenient, super easy, and saves you a ton of money. A, in gas, but B, it's cheaper than most grocery stores too. So that link down below. This next one is one of my favorite minerals, and it's definitely overlooked a lot. It's zinc. And a zinc deficiency seems to be very bad when it comes down to weight loss. Now, there's a study that was published in Diabetologia and Metabolic Syndrome that investigated this quite well. They had subjects go on a 15-week weight loss regime. They gave them 30 milligrams of zinc or a placebo alongside their 300-calorie deficit. They all lost weight, but what they found is that the zinc group lost significantly more weight, and all that was different was a zinc supplement. But they also had reduced inflammation, they also had improved insulin resistance, and various other markers that had improved. A big thing that they also noted too is that their appetite was down, and we have a potential mechanical sort of explanation for this. Now, the big reason they probably lost weight is zinc's very important role in beta cell function. So if zinc was able to reduce inflammation as much as we really saw in this paper, then that would mean that the beta cells in the pancreas that produce insulin were able to receive a signal much better, which means that they were able to signal for the cells to absorb glucose better, lowering fasting glucose, improving HbA1c, and ultimately improving weight loss as well. But the other thing that's really important that's often overlooked is that zinc plays a role in leptin function. So if we are deficient in zinc, we can develop what's called leptin resistance. Leptin is a hormone that is secreted by the fat that communicates with the brain to make sure that the brain knows we have enough fat on hand, so it therefore regulates the metabolism. Leptin resistance is where you're pumping out so much leptin that the brain just stops paying attention to it. You become resistant to the leptin. If you're deficient in zinc, you become much more leptin resistant. But with this, there's also an increase in what's called NPY. NPY is an incretin that makes you want to eat more, particularly makes you want to eat more carbohydrates. So it makes you crave more carbs. That's a simple way of putting it. You combine that with insulin resistance when you're zinc deficient. You combine that with leptin resistance when you're zinc deficient, and you're eating a bunch of carbs that are causing a serious problem when you can't really manage your fuels properly. Now with zinc, I recommend shellfish if you can do it. Shellfish is one of the best sources of zinc. Pumpkin seed's a tremendous source of zinc. Any kind of meat is really gonna be a good source of zinc. Eggs, a tremendous source of zinc. Most seeds are a really good source of zinc as well. And again, once again, legumes make the cut. So it's kind of funny. We're kind of like really aligning down this Mediterranean approach anyway, just with slightly more protein. Now the next one is calcium. This is interesting because I say dietary calcium because I do not recommend you take a calcium supplement. The thing with calcium is if you look at the data, calcium that goes into a fat cell, high amounts of calcium in a fat cell, actually end up stopping fat burning from occurring. That makes it sound like we should decrease our calcium intake. However, the more dietary calcium that we take in, the less calcium ends up in a fat cell. What happens when we're low in dietary calcium is parathyroid and calcitriol are two hormones, and they end up driving calcium into the fat cell, and that stops fat burning from occurring. If we have enough calcium coming in the diet, that doesn't happen, and fat burning can go ahead on its way. I do not recommend a calcium supplement. Even the American Heart Association noted that calcium supplements are linked with a higher risk of coronary artery disease or coronary calcium, so don't do that. What you want to do is you want to, of course, do dairy. If you can do dairy, go for it. Also, fermented dairy is going to absorb better. Calcium is going to get taken up better. So some kind of kefir, anything like that, yogurt, cottage cheese, sardines, things like that, they have the bones, so you're actually getting the calcium that way, and then edamame and tofu if you don't eat meat. The next and final one is iron, but it comes with a caveat too. You probably shouldn't just go willy-nilly get an iron supplement. There was a study published in Scientific Reports that demonstrated that iron deficiency and obesity tend to go hand in hand. And then if you look at the rodent model data, you can see that if an iron supplement is in place, it reduces the amount of weight gained and metabolic issues associated with an obesity-inducing diet in mice. That doesn't mean that by taking an iron supplement, you're going to prevent yourself from getting fat. What it means is there is a likely mitochondrial issue that happens when we're deficient in iron, especially alongside a poor diet. So it's interesting because it might help the mitochondria go through what's called beta oxidation and utilize fats better. In short, iron makes sense with beta oxidation. Iron helps us carry oxygen, which would mean it would help us burn fat and use fuel in that particular way at a lower intensity. So how do you drive it up without a supplement? Well, in this case, things like spinach are a tremendous source of non-heme iron, but the best way to really get your iron is going to be through meat. That's just what it comes down to. So at the end of the day, the biggest thing you could probably focus on is going to be your magnesium intake and probably your zinc intake. Hopefully the rest come in through the diet. In fact, the magnesium and the zinc are the two ones that I would recommend getting from supplements if you have to. The other three I would recommend getting from the diet as much as you possibly can. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. See you tomorrow.